It was Danny's first night as the new security guard at the old hospital. The building had been abandoned for years, but the owners wanted someone to keep watch after a series of break-ins. Danny didn't mind. It sounded easy. He just had to walk around and make sure everything stayed quiet. At 10 p.m., Danny arrived. The hospital was huge, with dark hallways that seemed to stretch forever. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing softly. He had his flashlight, a walkie-talkie, and a map of... The first few hours were uneventful. Danny walked the halls, checking locked doors and glancing into empty rooms. Dust covered everything. Some windows were broken, and the cold wind whistled through the cracks. At midnight, he heard the first sound. It was faint, like the tapping of footsteps. Danny froze. He pointed his flashlight down the hallway, but nothing was there. He tried to tell himself it was just the wind, but the sound didn't stop. It was getting closer. "Hello?" Danny called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. He decided to follow the noise, even though his hands were shaking. He walked slowly, the beam of his flashlight shaking as he moved. The sound led him to the third floor, an area marked off on his map as closed for repairs. Danny hesitated. He wasn't supposed to be here, but curiosity got the better of him. He pushed open the door. The air was colder here, and it smelled faintly of bleach. The floor creaked under his boot. Then he saw it. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway. It was tall and thin, but the way it moved wasn't human. It seemed to glide, not walk. Danny felt his heart pounding in his chest. He called out again, but the shadow didn't stop. Instead, it turned a corner and disappeared. Danny ran after it. When he turned the corner, the hallway was empty, but something was wrong. The doors on this floor were slightly open now, even though Danny was sure they had been locked. Slowly, he approached the first room. Inside was a hospital bed, dusty and forgotten, but on the wall, written in red, were the words, "Leave now." Danny stumbled back, his flashlight slipping from his hand. That's when he heard the laughter. It was soft at first, like a child giggling. Then it grew louder, echoing from all around him. He turned to run, but the hallway was different now. The doors were gone, and the walls seemed to stretch endlessly. The laughter turned into whispers. Danny could barely understand them, but one word kept repeating, "Stay." The lights flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. Danny fumbled for his flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. The whispers were closer now, right next to his ear. He felt something cold brush his arm. And then, silence. When the morning crew arrived, they found Danny's flashlight on the floor of the third floor. His walkie-talkie was still working, but Danny was gone. I still remember that night like it just happened. I was working the late shift at the diner, my first one. It was a small place on the edge of town, quiet most of the time. I thought it would be easy. I thought wrong. The night started off normal. A few truckers came in for coffee, and an older couple ordered pie. By 11 p.m., the place was empty except for me and the cook, Joe. Joe wasn't much of a talker, so I spent most of my time cleaning the counter and refilling ketchup bottles. Around midnight, I heard the bell over the door ring. I looked up, but no one was there. "Wynn must have pushed it open," I said, mostly to myself. Joe grunted and kept flipping burgers on the grill. He didn't seem to care. I walked over to the door and checked outside. The parking lot was empty and the road was dark. Shrugging it off, I locked the door and went back to cleaning. A few minutes later, the bell rang again. This time, I was sure the door hadn't moved. "Joe, did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" he replied without turning around. I felt a chill but tried to laugh it off. "Never mind, just the wind." But it wasn't the wind. At 12:30, things got strange. I was in the back, grabbing more napkins, when I heard the jukebox turn on. The old machine hadn't worked for years, or so I'd been told. But now it was playing an old, scratchy tune I didn't recognize. "Joe?" I called out. No answer. When I stepped back into the diner, Joe was gone. His spatula was on the floor, and the grill was still sizzling. "Joe, this isn't funny," I said, my voice shaking. That's when I saw it, a figure sitting at the booth in the corner. I hadn't heard anyone come in, and I was sure the door was still locked. The person was wearing a hat, and their face was hidden in the shadows. "Sorry, we're closed," I said, trying to sound calm. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, And that's when the jukebox stopped. The sudden silence made my ears ring. I felt frozen, like my feet were stuck to the floor. "Joe?" I whispered, even though I knew it wasn't him. The figure slowly turned its head toward me, but there was no face, just darkness where it should have been. I screamed and ran for the back door. When I looked back, the diner was empty, the figure was gone, and Joe's spatula was back on the counter like nothing had happened. I quit the next morning. Whatever was in that diner, I didn't want to find out. I work the night shift at a small gas station on the outskirts of town. It's a quiet place, tucked away from the busy part of the city. The only customers who stop by are truckers, travelers, and the occasional late-night driver looking to refuel. Most nights it's calm, and I don't mind the peace. I have a small radio to keep me company, and the usual routine of stocking the shelves and keeping the place clean. But one night, everything changed. It was around 1 a.m. when I noticed that things felt different. The air was colder than usual, and the faint hum of the neon lights flickering above me seemed louder than normal. I shrugged it off as nothing, busying myself by cleaning the counter. That's when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, expecting a customer, but no one was there. The door had opened on its own. It was still, and I could hear the wind howling outside, but there were no cars in the... I frowned. Maybe the door had malfunctioned, or maybe the wind had pushed it. I stepped over to the door to check, but everything seemed fine. No one in sight. I locked the door again and went back to the counter. But the feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. About an hour passed, and I started to feel more and more on edge. It was dead quiet, and I was the only one there. I decided to go outside for a break, get some fresh air. When I stepped into the parking lot, the cold hit me like a slap. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me and walked around the station for a bit, trying to clear my head. That's when I saw something strange. Near the edge of the lot, where the trees started to line the road, there was a figure standing still. At first, I thought it was a person. Someone waiting for a ride or just standing there in the darkness. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring toward the gas pump. "Hey," I called out. But there was no response. I felt my heart beat faster. The figure didn't look like a person anymore. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its shape seemed off, like it was stretching and warping in the shadows. I couldn't make out any details. The streetlights barely reached that far into the lot, and the darkness around it seemed to swallow the light. I took a step toward it, but the moment I moved, the figure vanished. Just like that. It was gone, swallowed up by... I stood there, frozen in place, staring at the spot where it had been. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I quickly turned and ran back into the gas station, locking the door behind me. The rest of the night felt like it dragged on forever. I couldn't stop looking out the windows, half expecting to see the figure standing there again, watching, but no one came. The rest of the night passed in a strange silence. When my shift finally ended at 7 a.m., I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I grabbed my things and rushed out the door, making sure to lock up tightly. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Maybe they'd think I was crazy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, something watching the gas station, waiting for the next night. I didn't take another night shift at that station again. Even now, every time I drive by that gas station, I can't help but feel like something's still standing out there in the dark, waiting for the next person to come by. I was working the night shift at McDonald's for 3 months. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it was easy money, and I didn't mind the quiet hours. The restaurant was located on the outskirts of town, away from the busy areas, so it didn't get much traffic at night. Most of the time, it was just me and the deep fryers, the occasional customer coming in for a late-night meal, and the hum of the fridge in the back. My shift started at 11 p.m. and went until 7 a.m. The night always felt longer than it should, but I got used to it. The routine was simple: take orders, make food, clean up. On quiet nights, I'd scroll through my phone or play music to pass the time. But one night, things didn't go the way they usually did. It started around 2 a.m. The restaurant had been dead quiet for the past hour. No customers, just me wiping down the counters and waiting for time to pass. Suddenly, I heard the faint jingle of the doorbell. It was the kind of noise you only hear when someone opens the door. I turned around expecting to see a customer, but there was no one there. I stood still for a moment, staring at the door. The parking lot outside was empty. No cars, no people. I walked over and checked it. The door was still closed and the bell had stopped ringing. I shrugged it off. Maybe it had been the wind or a gust that had made the bell sound. The restaurant had old doors after all. I went back to my cleaning, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard something else, a faint tapping sound coming from the back of the restaurant near the storage room. It was soft at first, almost like a person knocking on the wall. I frowned and walked toward the sound, thinking maybe something had fallen in the back or the freezer door had come loose. As I approached the storage room, I paused. The tapping stopped. The air felt strangely still, almost thick with silence. I opened the door to the storage room, shining my flashlight inside. The room was empty. The boxes of supplies were stacked neatly in their usual spots. There was nothing out of place. I exhaled and closed the door, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had crept up on me. But as I turned to head back to the front, I heard the tapping again. This time it was louder, and it was coming from inside the kitchen. "Hello?" I called out, a little uneasy. No reply. I took a step forward, but I wasn't sure what to expect. The kitchen was dimly lit, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. I grabbed the handle of the fryer, planning to check it, and that's when I saw it. The fryer was on. It was full of oil, bubbling as if it had been running for a while. But I had turned it off hours ago. I know I had. My stomach twisted, and I quickly turned the fryer off. The light above flickered, and the other machines, grills, fryers, the soda fountain, clicked on one by one, like they were waking up. My heart began to race. I checked the switches. Everything was off. The machines shouldn't have been running. I turned everything off again, but before I could step back, the lights overhead flickered and then went out completely. The room plunged into darkness, leaving only the emergency exit lights glowing dimly. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. The air in the kitchen was cold now, much colder than it had been before. A shiver ran down my spine. I pulled my phone out to use the flashlight, but before I could turn it on, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps. They came from the hallway leading to the back door just beyond the kitchen. It sounded like someone was walking in heavy boots, dragging their feet. I froze, holding my breath, trying to figure out if I was imagining it. The footsteps came closer, and my heart hammered against my chest. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the hallway, but no one was there. The hallway was dark and empty. I felt like I was losing my mind. I told myself it was just my nerves, that it had to be the wind or a trick of the light. But then, I heard the bell at the front door jingle again, louder this time. I turned, but the door was still shut. There was no one standing there. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned around to face the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the doorway of the kitchen was a shadow. It was tall, too tall for any person I had ever seen. I couldn't make out its features, but it was darker than the rest of the shadows, like it was absorbing the light around it. It stood there motionless, its outline barely visible in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow didn't move, it just watched me. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in place, but it felt like an eternity. Slowly, the shadow seemed to bend, as if it was reaching out for me. That was enough. I snapped out of my daze and ran. I ran straight for the back door, not looking back, not caring about anything else. I didn't even stop to grab my jacket. I just ran into the cold night air, heart racing, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't go back inside. I waited in the parking lot until my shift was over, too terrified to step back inside the building. When morning came, I called the manager and told them I wouldn't be returning. I didn't even bother explaining what had happened. I've never worked another night shift since that night at McDonald's. Every time I drive by the restaurant now, I get a chill down my spine. I can't shake the feeling that something is still inside, waiting,